Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're gonna continue with our book Battle for the Mind. We're gonna start chapter 2, and this is the title: Animal and Human Behavior Compared. Let's see. There we go. And it starts like this. We have repeatedly heard it argued that comparisons between the behavior of man and animals, such as those made in chapter 1, are invalid. Because man has soul, or at least a far more highly developed brain and intelligence. Yet, since experiments on the digestive and glandular systems of animals have proved helpful in framing the fundamental laws which govern these systems in the human body, why not experiments on the higher nervous system? If the analogy between human and canine digestion and glandular systems have been disallowed and animal experimentation forbidden, general medicine might still be in the same backward state as modern psychiatry. The fact being that psychological theory has too often taken the place of scientific experiment as one of the main means of accounting for normal and abnormal patterns of human behavior. This chapter, it is hoped, will show that Pavlov's experiments on dogs are so remarkably applicable to certain problems of human behavior that the remark, men are not dogs, becomes at times almost irrelevant. The behavior of the human brain, when subjected during World War II to strains and stresses, provided a remarkable opportunity for testing Pavlov's analogical conclusions. It will therefore be convenient to make a resume of some of our own published wartime observations and others recorded and discussed in journals by books by Sir Charles Simmons, Swank, Grinker, and others. So these are references. So Charles Simmons wrote The Human Response to Flying Stress. Swank wrote Combat Exhaustion, and Grinker wrote War Neurosis in North Africa, the Tusninian Campaign. We're gonna go once we're done with the book. We're gonna go over some of these references. In June 1944, for instance, many shell-shock patients were being admitted to emergency hospitals in England, both from the Normandy beachhead and from Blitzed, London. Some of these showed all the usual symptoms of anxiety and depression observed in peacetime psychiatric practice. Others were in a state of simple but profound exhaustion, generally accompanied. How do you even pronounce that? Accompanied. Let me see. Give me a second.
Accompanied.
Accompanied. Accompanied. Okay, I got it. Okay, the usual accompanied by a very marked loss of weight. Still, others made gross and uncoordinated yet regular jerking and writhing movements. I still do jerking and writhing. What's writhing? Give me 1 second. I don't know what writhing is. Writhing.
Writhing.
Writhing. Making twisting, squirting movements of contortions of the body. Like, I'm not sure if you have seen it, but actually now they're a lot less frequent. But I still do breathing movements, and I do sudden jerking movements. I still do. So these happen especially when I am relaxing, when I'm in a state of relaxation. I like all of a sudden just do things like that. I still do even when I'm like standing. It happens all the time. And I wasn't like that before gang stalking. Writhing movements, which were accentuated by temporary loss of speech or a stammer. Oh man, I'm sorry, but all these words are like new to me. I don't know what stammer is. I'm so sorry if this is boring you. But I'm Mexican and English is my second language. Speak with sudden involuntary pauses. Stammer.
Stamp.
Okay, I don't stammer. I used to. That's actually gone. But I did stammer for a while. Or perhaps an explosive form of talking. One group of patients had reached various degrees of collapse and stupor. It was in these acute cases that Pavlov's conditioned reflexes and psychiatry, which were then studying for the first time, proved most enlightening. Parallels between their behavior and that of Pavlov's dogs when subjected to experimental stresses leaped to the eye. Roy Swank and his colleagues have since 1945 published a series of papers based on their study of some 5,000 combat casualties in the Normandy campaign, nearly all of whom were Americans. His detailed findings point to the overwhelming influence of the fear of death and of continued stress on the development of combat exhaustion. He also emphasizes that the first reaction of the men to combat was fear. By far, the greater number of men controlled their fears, gained knowledge of combat, and became confident, battle-wise troops. It was only after a period of efficient combat, which varied with the men and the severity of the combat, that the first evidence of combat exhaustion happened. The protective inhibition reported by Pavlov in his study of dogs throws light on what then followed. The men noticed a state of constant fatigue, not relieved by several days of rest. They lost their ability to distinguish the various noises of combat. They became unable to tell friendly from enemy artillery and combat bombs and their location. Exhalatory symptoms could also become uncontrolled. Thus, they became easily startled and confused, lost their confidence, and became tense. They were irritable, frequently blew their tops over. I'm sorry, double entendre, blowing your top, that's fucking hysterical. I'm so sorry, I couldn't help myself. Blew their tops, over responded to all stimuli. For example, they would hit the dirt on the slightest provocation, whereas before this caution was reserved for selected appropriate stimuli. So this is pretty much comparing actual human exhaustion, war exhaustion, to the exhaustion of animals. Swank reports the final dramatic change from excitation to inhibition, also described by Pavlov and his dogs. This state of general hyperreactivity was followed insidiously by another group of symptoms referred to as emotional exhaustion. The men became dull and listless. They became mentally and physically retarded, preoccupied, and had increasing difficulty in remembering details. This was accompanied by indifference and apathy, and by a due apathetic faces. What are facies? Facies.
Facies.
Facies. The appearance or facial expression of an individual that is typical of a particular disease or condition. Like their face. So their faces express apathy. God, this is kind of a difficult reading. To be honest, I am understanding more of this than I did it the first time I read it, because I am making sure that we are all clear on what we're trying to what we're talking about. So sorry if I'm actually slowing down the reading by trying to understand things that I didn't understand before, but it is most likely that more than one viewer will have the same questions that I have on what we're talking, and if there's something that I don't understand, I want to understand it with you. Let's see, the uniformity of the histories. Okay, facies. The uniformity of the histories, when subsequently checked, was an indication that, for the most part, these complaints were not exaggerated or fabricated. He points out that before being subjected to such stresses, the average combat soldier was probably more stable than the average civilian, since obviously unstable individuals had been excluded prior to combat. And by large, the men under consideration were from high morale units. Oh, this thing fucking died. Fuck you. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to pause this until my iPad charges again. Anyways, so while my iPad charges, I want to tell you the goal of this channel. It is to understand gang stalking, everything about it, and how the mind works, how gang stalking works, because the more understanding you have, the harder it's going to be for gang stalkers to manipulate your mind. So, thankfully, I had studied a lot of narcissism, like a lot. Like for the 3 years that we were, give me a second. So for the 3 years that we were under the quarantine, because of COVID, I was studying animation, and I was just studying animation, and I was also studying psychology, particularly an emphasis on people with narcissistic personality disorders. I am extremely well versed in everything that has to do with narcissists. And honestly, I was given the opportunity, because gang stalking I see as an opportunity to understand the depths of the mind better. It was pretty much the best thing that had ever happened to me, because I was able to get a deeper insight into how these people think. So these people see everyone else as a dog. Like, they don't see your mind as, they don't see you as an advanced being. They see you as a dog that can be trained, that your mind can be trained. That's how they fucking see you. So they were pretty much aware of Parlov's findings. That's what it feels like. So this is a new way of looking at people that I had to learn how to understand, because without understanding it, I was completely defenseless against gang stalking. So you have to know how your mind can be manipulated for ends of the benefit of others, of the manipulator, to your detriment, because that's what it is. When someone is manipulating you, they are taking away your freedom by taking charge of your mind and having you do things that they want you to do without you knowing. So what does this mean to you? This means that you have to pretty much be, if you're getting gang stalked, you have to always be on the defensive, and you have to learn how to attack. And by attack, I mean, well, it depends on what type of personality you have. So you can protect your mind or you can fuck with them too. I like fucking with them too because I want to practice what they preach. I want to learn how to apply these principles. Not because I'm an evil person or because I enjoy it, but because I think that by practicing it, I will come to understand it better. And you have to kind of have a little bit of shamelessness. Anyways, you have to have a little bit of shamelessness, and you have to pretty much kind of have a carelessness for the freedom of others. So, this is the thing. I feel guilty in the beginning. However, oh, it's my cigarette. Oh, there it is. However, the moment that someone gives himself the freedom of using you by law, you are allowed to do the same to them. Period. So don't feel any guilt. I don't feel any guilt. Because if these people give themselves the freedom to manipulate me, I give myself the opportunity or the freedom to manipulate them. Because that's how I roll. Eye for an eye. Even though I will still deny it and I will appear like I'm an innocent angel, I have to understand how they work. And so we pretty much, when someone tries to manipulate you, they are inevitably giving you permission to do the same to them. That's how I see it. So, and this is the thing. I wasn't like this, but I've had to be like this because I am not gonna just sit there and take it. I will take it for as much as I need to until I understand what's going on and understand how to defend myself from it, and how to understand on how I can get even. Because I want to learn how they do it. Why? So that I can talk about it and pretty much share the knowledge with you. I manipulate for purposes of education. Not because I get anything out of it. The only thing I get out of it is making more people free from it. So yeah, so the goal of this channel is pretty much to educate you on as many aspects of these types of people, particularly gang stalking, so that you can understand how they work, how they function, how they think. Therefore, you can develop your own strategies on how to defeat them and how to not allow them to destroy you. Because in the end, that's what they want, your destruction. So, I'm not going to destroy them. However, I want to destroy their ability to destroy other people. And how do I do that? By making it common knowledge. So, please like, dislike, share, or privately, publicly, whatever, I don't care. But please disperse this knowledge as much as you can. Because in the end, everyone wins. The more information that is out there, we're all winners. We all win. Except the people who want to fuck you over, which is a win for all of us. If you consider yourself an empathic person, if people have taken advantage of you, and you have just come to the realization that people are, in fact, trying to destroy you when you don't even know it, then you are susceptible to these people. They see something in you that they want to destroy. And there's a lot of people like you and I. So what do you have to do? You have to learn. And it is our responsibility to make this information as public as possible. Period. That's just what it is. So this information will be useful, and people who are ready for it will find it interesting. People are over it or know this, or people who are not at this level yet of understanding are gonna find this information unusable, and it's fine. But everything will have its right place. You're gonna connect with this information when you're ready. All right. Anyways, my iPad is still charging. It's at 13%. Sadly, I have to go to work and I have to eat, so I will continue this later. Yeah. So we left off at he points out, he meaning Parlo, points out that before being subjected to stresses, the average combat soldier was probably more stable than the average civilian, since obviously unstable individuals had been excluded prior to combat. By and large, the men under consideration. Give me a second. I'm trying to open my window because it's fucking hot in here. There we go. Okay, so it seemed. I'm sorry. So, more stable than the average civilian, since obviously unstable individuals had been excluded prior to combat. By and large, the men under consideration were from high morale units and were willing soldiers. It seemed evident that shrinking played a small part and was almost entirely confined to men with short combat records. Sir Charles Simons, discussing his medical experiences in the Royal Air Force during the same war, similarly concluded that the tension resulting from prolonged exercise of courage was a most important element in the development of emotional exhaustion. So tension from exercising your courage for an extended period of time resulted in emotional exhaustion. These were our findings too. So meaning that exercising courage that led to emotional exhaustion, and Parlov's experiments it resulted in the same Parlov's experiments or the records of the other war. I'm not sure exactly which one. No. So the author from the book that did the studies compared to Sir Charles Simons when he discussed his medical experiences in the Royal Air Force during the same war, that the findings were the same. When the soldiers exercise when the soldiers exercise courage, that resulted in give me a second, in the development of emotional exhaustion. So pretty much that's two people that agreed to the same thing, to psychologists, that when you exercise your courage a lot, it will take you to a state of emotional exhaustion. These were our findings too, after we had dealt with several thousands of civilian and service patients admitted to specialized neurosis units in emergency medical service hospitals. So this is a fact because it happened with thousands of civilian service units. Now, the most interesting of all, Swank's findings to this study of religious and political conversion concerned the time rate of breakdown under continued battle stresses. So we're gonna get a diagram, which I'm gonna put it like right here somewhere. So there's the time rate of breakdown. Okay. So combat exhaustion may appear in as few as 15 or 20 days. That's a long time. To 20 days, or in as many as 40 or 50 days, instead of approximately 30 days. as it did in the majority of men. One thing alone seems to be certain. Practically all infantry soldiers suffer from a neurotic reaction eventually, if they are subjected to the stress of modern combat continuously and long enough. So it's inevitable. It's gonna happen to everyone as long as the stress, as you're subjected to the stress long enough. In November 1944, Swank still felt that an occasional soldier, perhaps less than 2%, belonged to the group capable of withstanding combat stress for an inordinate length of time. But we find him reporting in 1946. This is what he wrote. This seemed true in November 1944. Since then, we have concluded that all normal men eventually suffer combat exhaustion in prolonged, continuous, and severe combat. The exceptions to this rule are psychotic, insane soldiers, and a number of examples of this have been observed. Since certain techniques of religious and political conversion can be made, since certain techniques of religious and political conversion can be made quite as fearful and as exhausting to the brain as active combat experiences, the importance of Swank's findings must be heavily stressed. His statistical and clinical facts should be brought home, especially to those who like to believe that the avoidance of breakdown in battle or under brainwashing is simply a matter of exercising sufficient willpower and courage. Okay, those who like to believe that the avoidance of breakdown in battle or under brainwashing is simply a matter of sufficient willpower and courage. On the contrary, the continued exercise of willpower and courage may, in certain circumstances, exhaust the brain and hasten final collapse. Okay, so I'm gonna screenshot the graph. I'm gonna cut this video, and then I'm gonna put the graph right here. So if you see it right now, that means that I already did all that. So that way you know what I'm talking about. All right. So as soon as I'm done doing that, I'm going to continue this reading. All right. So now we're going to go over what's in the graph. All right. So here we can see the line pointing up, the vertical line. It says degree of combat efficiency, and and it takes about 20 days for the soldier to reach the period of maximum efficiency. So it takes 10 days. From 10 to 12 days, the soldier becomes battle-wise. The 20-day mark is where the period of maximum efficiency is reached, and that is all the way to like 30 to 32 days. Combat exhaustion happens from like 32 days to or combat exhaustion from 30 to 60 days. So but in those, there's two sub stages in the combat exhaustion. There's a hyperreactive stage. Hyperreactive, I think that would be, you need to probably take soldiers right from there, because a period of overconfidence. Hyperreactive, overconfident. Okay, that's interesting. And that's up to that's like a whole month. Wow. And then from like 45 to day 60, well, from like today 55 or 57, and you're pretty much like done. And you actually reach a vegetative state if you're in combat 60 days. That's more like about day 60, so 2 months of continuous combat. That's insane. And keep in mind that these people have been like trained endlessly, you know. So now, this is what it says next. So it says, portrayal of the relation of stress and the development of combat exhaustion to the combat efficiency. Heavy black line of the average American soldier. So this is the average American soldier in 1944. So now, we're done with the graph, and I'm gonna just leave it here. just because I think it's just so you can take a look at it. Now, when dogs cooperate in experiments, testing their tolerance to stress, they are all the easier to break down. When the dogs cooperate in the experiments, testing their tolerance to stress, they are all the easier to break down. The loyal efforts they make prove their own undoing. So, this actually also applies to gang stalking. How? Well, I was cooperating when I was going through the gang stalking. How? I was, I guess I was a loyal blindly loyal person. And until now is when I'm just coming to that conclusion, because, well, even though they were doing fucked up shit to me, I was still there. I still had faith in the people, and because I didn't. So because you have faith in people, oftentimes you don't see what they're actually doing, and that's the thing. Pretty much, you have to be very aware of who you're being loyal to. I'm not saying for a second I had a thought, you decrease your loyalty. But no, be incredibly selective to who you're loyal to. For example, if one person does one thing that you see, look, you don't need any type of proof. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. If someone is doing something that is making you feel uneasy, uncomfortable, they can read you, they can see it. And if they keep doing it continuously, you know that person is out to get you. That that person is purposely doing those things to your detriment. So you owe no loyalty to that person. You owe no explanation. You owe nothing to that person. So what should you do? Get the fuck out of there or kick them the fuck out. Just like that. All right? So you have to you have to respect yourself. And if someone is disrespecting you, fuck them. Like Mr. Garrison said, I'm just kidding. Don't fuck them all to death. Just fuck him, kick him out. Don't block him. Tell him straight out. Don't you ever fucking talk to me again. Not here, not anywhere, not ever. Not on social media, not on Grindr, nowhere. Fuck you. And then just erase them for your life forever. Listen, there's a loads of people out there. There's a lot of people. There's billions. You have no time to waste dealing with these types of people because, listen, they're taking time that you can be spending with someone who actually respects you. If someone doesn't, at the first offense, get them the fuck out of your life. Like that. That simple. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. Now, so the moment you are trying to stay loyal to the person who is obviously fucking you over, you are literally helping them fuck you up. Don't help them. Get rid of do not allow them to have access to you. Don't. Now, normally, it seems the human nervous system, like the dog's, is in a state of dynamic equilibrium between excitation and inhibition. Yes, that's true. It doesn't seem, that's a fact. But if subjected to excessive stimulation, it can pass into the same states of excessive excitation or excessive inhibition. So inhibition is when pretty much your body wants to rest, when your digestive system starts working, when you're sleeping, when you're regenerating. Excitation is when all the internal processes stop and when all your energy is focused on surviving. Your fight or flight. But if subjected to excessive stimulation, it can pass into the same states of excessive excitation or excessive inhibition, which Pavlov described in dogs. The brain then becomes incapable for the time being of its usual intelligent functioning. Numerous examples of this phenomenon have been reported in the medical literature, as when, for instance, hitherto normal frontline soldiers have passed into an intense excitatory state, running at random across no man's land or dashing suicidally and uselessly into machine gun fire. Wow. One man was reported in 1945 to have advanced twice under fire to help a friend whose leg had been blown off, but each time became so inhibited on arrival that he found himself unable to give first aid. Wow, so this guy pretty much ran to save his friend that had his leg fucking blown off. Give me a second. Let me open this. I just want more air. There we go. All right, so we were at... That's too loud, isn't it? No. There we go. All right, so we are right now at soldier after the death of a friend. Okay, so opponents are unable to give first aid. So this guy pretty much ran into machine gun fire, twice under fire, to help a friend whose leg had been blown off. But each time he became so inhibited on arrival, so he just couldn't do shit. Once he arrived, that he found himself unable to give first aid. Then he was suddenly overcome by acute excitement, banged his head repeatedly against a tree, and rushed wildly about calling for an ambulance. When the ambulance eventually arrived, he had himself forcibly strapped into it. Oh shit. Another soldier, after the death of a friend, tried to tackle a German tank single-handed. He had to be held down by his comrades and dispatched to a psychiatric center. Uncontrolled cerebral excitation of this sort seems to be generally marked by an inhibition of normal judgment. So your judgment literally just gets inhibited. So like your brain, when you have been when you have been under an excessive amount of stress for prolonged for extensive amounts of time, your judgment will literally not work. Sorry to it. So okay. So the state of protective inhibition noted by Pavlov in dogs subjected to acute stress also appears to be found in combat casualties. They often develop stupor or loss of memory, loss of the use of limbs, fainting attacks, etc. Others become literally paralyzed with fear. Others succumb to simple nervous exhaustion. And these are usually men of stable personality, who in addition to mental stress have been deprived of food and sleep for long periods. Sir Edward Spears, hey Brittany, Spears has described its occurrence in World War I. So here's the description that Sir Edward Spears described in its occurrence in World War I. He says, "These were very bad times, when the trench, choked with dead and wounded, collapsed under the bombardment, when men worked with frenzy to dig out a comrade, pulled him out with his face collapsed, then dug no more. At such times often had come a stupor a kind of overpowering sleepiness, merciful, but which the officer had to conquer. Holy shit. In some cases, the inhibitions seem limited to small focal regions of the brain. One patient, for instance, is reported as stammering only at the mention of an officer who had called him a coward. Dumbness succeeded by stammering during recovery was common. Such frequent disturbances of what Parlov seemed man's secondary signaling system may be explained, as he suggested, by its greater sensitivity to excessive stimulation. Consequent on its more recent evolutionary development, other forms of focal brain inhibition were seen in patients with fixed, rigid faces, complaining of a lump in the throat. Okay, I'm really familiar with the lump in the throat. So I don't want to... The fact that I say that I am familiar with a lump in my throat, I am not saying that what I have been through is anywhere near close to the stressful situations that these soldiers happen. All right, so please do not put words in my mouth. I am not saying that my gang stalking experience was as intense as someone in war. However, from what I have endured, I have had some of this symptoms sounds familiar to me. Or with bent back, lump in the throat, or with a bent back and weak, but not completely paralyzed legs. Okay, not work close to this. Such complete paralysis wasn't common, though the gait was often slowed down. Parlov noted a similar progressive inhibition in dogs submitted to bombardment of stimuli. It started in the mouth and the four parts of the body, and took some time to reach the hind legs. So it began in the mouth, and then it just began going to the back part of the dog. Patients often showed areas of both focal excitation and focal inhibition. There might be rigidity or inhibition of facial movements or speech combined with severe tremors of the body and hands, or a paralysis of speech might be combined with neck jerkings. I've experienced that. Acute anxiety was often marked by inability to swallow. Gang stalking actually does that to you, where sometimes, like this happened to me a couple of days ago, for no foreseeable reasons. I just felt like a knot in my throat, and my throat just like got closed, And it had nothing to do with cigarettes, and it had everything to do with gang stalking. One thing that used to happen to me really often is that when I believed that gang stalkers had actually control of my tongue, I used to bite my tongue often and hard, and I wouldn't do or say anything. But I was convinced, that gang stalkers were doing that to me to punish me. So I never said anything, but the immediate reflexive thought was gang stalkers are doing this to me. It's insane what one is actually made to believe when you're undergoing this type of crazy psyops, Now, we are right now at acute anxiety was often marked by inability to swallow. The upper part of the body might shake violently, while the lower part remains still. A set of grinning face might be accompanied by tremors, jerks, and writhings of other parts of the body. Sudden changes from excitation to inhibition, or... Is the door closed? No, there we go. I'm gonna have it a little open because it's like I'm not getting any air. Okay, that's okay. So we are at sudden changes from excitation to inhibition, or contrary-wise, were sometimes reported in these fluctuating cases. One man, for instance, had lain trembling in a ditch, half paralyzed with fear, when his company was ordered to attack. But as soon as his officer taunted him with, "A girl would put up a better show," he suddenly became wildly excited, shouted, "Come on, boys," leapt out of the trench to the attack, and then fainted. That's insane. Other soldiers ran about shouting in panic. This phase being followed by a sudden dumbness. One man had fallen down paralyzed and speechless in a village street, which was under bombardment, but when picked up by his comrades, suddenly began to shout and struggle. These are kind of intense depictions. It is important to note that in many cases of breakdown, under intolerable stress, reported by various writers, no motive of immediate gain could be discerned. On the contrary, it often occurred just when normal behavior would have been much more likely to secure the victim's personal safety. These sudden states of total inhibition or collapse after severe stresses recall Pavlov's transmarginal phase in dogs. Other examples of this extreme form of inhibition were observed when men arrived at the hospital in almost complete hysterical stupor. Similarly, inhibitory states were later induced experimentally when we made patients relive their battle or bombing experiences under drugs, and they grew very excited. These abnormal mental states may be succeeded in humans, as in Pavlov's dogs, by what he termed adynamic stereotypy. What the fuck is a stereotypy? Give me 1 second. Stereotypy.
Stereotypy.
Oh, stereotypy. Stereotypy. The persistent repetition of an act, especially by an animal for no obvious purpose. The most common abnormal behavior among zoo animals is stereotypy, it's called. So I'm trying not to give any free advertisement. Not that this is all big and shit, but anyway. Stereotypy. So dynamic stereotypy. What would it make stereotypy dynamic? I guess that is more than one movement. That is a new functional system in the brain, which requires increasingly less work by the nervous system to maintain it. The repetitive pattern of movements or thoughts, thus inhibited by some patients, did not yield easily to simple methods of treatment, such as removal to hospital and rest. Further strong stimuli might be needed to disperse the new and highly abnormal patterns now implanted. What? Further strong stimuli might be needed to disperse the new and highly abnormal patterns now implanted. But one group of patients reacted better to heavy sedation with drugs than to re-stimulation. Among them, I'm right now, I'm not sure exactly what's going on in the book, so I am slightly confused. But we're gonna keep reading, and then I'm gonna see if I can actually understand. But one group of patients reacted better to heavy sedation with drugs. So, give me 1 second. So I need to go over this. The abnormal mental states may be succeeded in humans. So I'm lacking the understanding of what a dynamic stereotypy means. Pavlov's dog, dynamic stereotypity. Give me a second. Stereotypity, dynamic, Pavlov. So, So we're gonna read this, and it's called Parlov's conceptualization of the dynamic stereotype in the theory of higher nervous activity. So the abstract. So it's like a neurotrans. The cortical hemispheres of neurotransits coming from the external and internal environments. In this formation, the antitheory is part of the theory of dynamics, not associative. It postulated the synthesis of conditioned reflexes, not associative chains of conditioned reflexes. So pretty much it's like a... But how is this related to the dog? That is a new functional system in the brain which requires increasingly less work by the nervous system. Okay, so I wanna compare it to like when you're driving. Like when you're driving, you can be thinking of other things, but your nervous system, I guess that would be like dynamic stereotypity, because it's functional and it's dynamic and it's repetitive. If one of you has the information to that, the answer to that, please put it in the comments, because I am lost in this. So I'm gonna highlight it in red because I don't understand what the fuck this person is talking about. Reciprocation. Okay. And highlight in pink. There we go. So, to simple methods of treatment as removal to the hospital and restaurant. So, what do you mean by the simple methods of treatment, such as removal to the hospital? So, further strong stimuli might be needed to disperse the new and highly abnormal patterns of now implanted. So, I would think that that means that like an accidental implantation of a abnormal pattern of movement was done to the dog or to the soldier. But one group of patients reacted better to heavy sedation with drugs than to re-stimulation. Among them, some in states of confused excitement who had heard imaginary noises and voices and were now developing fresh fantasies. Okay. Unlike the typical peacetime patient who suffer from similar hallucinations, they quickly improved after a period of deep sleep and complete rest induced by sedatives. As Parlov's strongest excitatory type of dog who had also done when given large doses of bromide soon after an acute breakdown. So, this is the answer. This is one of the answers if you're going through gang stalking, you're unsure if you're hearing voices. You need deep sleep. Take some melatonin if you want sedation, but deep sleep will help you get rid of any type of auditory hallucinations. So, if you feel that your gang stalking is really intense, if you feel that gang stalking is everywhere and that everyone is reacting to you, go to sleep. Sleep a lot. Rest heavily. And it's gonna happen. Like for me, even after, so it took me a week of deep sleeping, a whole week, because I had to go to work. So I went to work and then I was not productive at work. Let me tell you, I almost actually got fired because I was tired and I was not producing. I was just like half dead, because I was so tired. So I literally was just really unproductive because everything about me was so tired. So for a whole sleep, I was just sleeping most of the time, sleeping. And then after the week, after the week passed, then only after a week, I was able to actually be productive, but it took literally like a week. Now, considering So when that was happening, I actually believed that they had access to my phone. Why? Because when I would look at my phone, the hallucinations were like, what is he looking at? Was he gonna look at porn? Is he gonna hit up his dealer? Like literally, I'm not kidding. But those were hallucinations. So when I had enough sleep, those those auditory hallucinations actually left. And then slowly those interpretations of the hallucinations actually disappeared. So it took me like a month or a month and a half for me to actually get rid of the narrative that they had access to my phone. If you believe that gang stalkers have access to your phone, you need to sleep. As simple as that sounds. Now, we're gonna continue. So this is how it goes. Such responses to stress, of course, occurred only in a small proportion of soldiers and civilian defense workers in the Blitz. The remainder were able to enjoy periods of rest between their ordeals, long enough to fend off a collapse. Breaking point being reached only after repeated or long continued periods of stress. The exception was when a sudden, enormous strain had been imposed on the nervous system. For example, a very near miss in a bomb explosion. In such cases, soldiers and civilians alike, although behaving to all outward appearances in a deliberate and conscious manner, might retain very little memory, if any, of the subsequent behavior, because transmarginal inhibition had abruptly supervened. Later, they might with equal suddenness regain consciousness and worry about where they had been during the 2 or 3 previous hours. So you suddenly had transmarginal inhibition, and then just all of a sudden they regained consciousness. And then all of a sudden they were wondering what has happened during the past 3 hours. So some memories of this lost period might return spontaneously later, or be recovered under sedatives which relax the inhibition. The equivalent phase of transmarginal inhibition, described by Parlow in his experiments on dogs, seemed frequent among our patients in the war. Normally, energetic and active people would sit about complaining that nothing interested them any longer, that they had ceased to feel joy or sorrow, whatever might happen. This phase would gradually pass off after rest and treatment, but in some cases persisted for a long time. So right now I'm actually questioning, have I not felt any joy for a long time? But to be honest, I feel joy when I'm working out. I'm typically just doing my work. But I've never been much of like a person of feeling sudden bouts of joy. Like I get joy when I see my analytics and I see that like in one night there's all of a sudden 20 hours of viewed content. To me that means a lot. It makes me really happy. But I've never been the type of person that has excitedly outward expressed joy. Never. However, I feel joy very often actually. Or I just like today I was like laughing the whole day because of I'm not sure what I was looking at or watching or whatever, but that's not the case with me. How about you? If you have been gang stalked for a long period of time, how do you compare the amount of joy that you feel? Is it the same? Is it less? I would like to hear your input. Please put it in the comments. Now, repeated Okay, so here we are. Some memories of the lost. Okay. Okay, there we. Okay, no, sorry, I got lost in the text. Fascinating examples of human behavior corresponding with Parlow's paradoxical phase were also seen. Okay, so now we're gonna read about the human behavior corresponding with the paradoxical phase that was seen in Parlov's dogs. Before reading the accounts of his experiments on dogs, we, meaning the people who are writing the book, we were at a loss to understand a case like the following. A patient of normal previous personality had been subjected to very severe bombing stress. When asked to hold out his hands and let the doctor see whether they had a tremor, he obeyed, but suddenly found himself unable to lower them again while he was being watched. This worried him, but what he found worse, he said, was that he could lower them if he stopped trying to do so, or thought about something else. He might, for instance, automatically lower them to feel in his pocket for a matchbox. In fact, the strong stimulus directed to making him do something which he wanted produced no response. Yet, a smaller, undirected stimulus remained effective. Okay, so, alright, so in a short time, this condition, to his great relief, passed off. We also had many patients suffering from severe fright, paralysis of the limbs. The harder the man tried to move them, the more paralyzed they became. Yet, if he stopped worrying about the difficulty, he might suddenly find it would improve. This paradoxical phase seemed to occur. So this is the paradoxical phase. When you don't think about doing something, it just happens, or a lesser stimuli. But when you get a strong stimuli, such as someone directly asking you to do something, then you will be paralyzed. This paradoxical phase seems to occur as frequently in mental as in physical experience. A simple instance is a condition which most brain workers are liable to while overworking. A simple instance is a condition which most brain workers are liable to while overworking. They try to remember names or words, but cannot do so until they have stopped trying. Okay, that's interesting. Both in peace and war, normally aggressive people may all at once develop uncharacteristic feelings of cowardice and feel for a while the uselessness of going on. And people who normally enjoy life the most may suddenly feel the strongest desire to die. Sudden unexplained aversions to people previously loved or admired are also met with these paradoxical and ultra-paradoxical phases. So is extremely aggressive behavior, alternating impredictably with abject submission. What's object? Like object but with an A. Of something bad. Huh. Okay. All right, so I have to go to work. I'm gonna just like post the next here. I have to do these videos in like long times because they require a lot of reading and a long time. So this is probably gonna be like a 2-hour video. I'm gonna head to work. I'm gonna continue on this later. Bye. During the Blitz, a series of bombs fell in the grounds of our hospital near London, and several city civilian patients were killed by one direct hit. The hospital contained many patients already under treatment for acute war neurosis, and paradoxical reversals of behavior under stress now kept appearing and disappearing. A bomb explosion might make a patient suddenly unable to move an arm, as described above. He was then given an intravenous injection of barbiturate to relax the functioning of his brain, whereupon he would immediately recover the use of his arm. But he might also recover it without the help of drugs, which when he calmed down again after the red. So barbiturates were given, and then people would actually barbiturates were given, and they would immediately regain control of their arm. However, when they could recover without the help of drugs when they come down after the raid. Many of these sudden switches from aggression to submission, or vice versa, also occurred with no obvious reason for the change. That's interesting. Actually, okay, so we're gonna just pause right here. So, I have to tell you about something. When I was getting gang stalked, I used to suddenly get this psychologically engulfing sensation where I would perceive movements as shadows. I would perceive things as people following me. It was like a state of paranoia, but it just turned on. Like, it turned on once. Well, I figured out what it was. The last time it happened is when I figured out that it was just a state of mind. So there is a state of mind where I'm not sure if it's neurosis or paranoia. I think it was paranoia, but the thing is that this paranoia was paranoia that was actually felt really real. It was paranoia that made me see things, even though I wasn't paranoid. So like, it happened to me at work several times where I was just like working, and then all of a sudden I would just see like a shadow. Or like someone moving, I would actually like, my mind would kind of make it the image of someone running. Also, in another instance, it happened when I was at a parking location, and I was getting ready to sleep. And then all of a sudden, I just like this state of paranoia. It was a state of paranoia that was separate from my consciousness. So like my mind was here, but like my entire nervous system was like paranoid. It's really hard to explain. So then I would look just around, and then I would just see like shadows, and the shadows, my mind perceived them as if they were like people just hiding in the darkness. And then I looked straight ahead, and then I swear to you, I saw a fucking ghost. It was like a ghost floating right in front of me. Like, my mind was literally converting the light reflection into a ghost. Like, I saw a fucking ghost. Like, it was a ghost. I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't believe in ghosts, and I know that it wasn't a ghost because I know what gang stalking does to you. It makes you perceive shit like that. But literally, it was just like floating in the middle, right there in front of me, and getting closer to me. And then it just kind of waned off. It waned off, and then it disappeared. But like it was like the sense of suspicion, a kind of like a negative sensation. And it was really weird, but it happened a lot during gang stalking. And that's why I wasn't scared, even though I saw the fucking ghost like right like in front of me. It was like I don't know, like 10 meters away from me, floating right in the center of my vision. And it was the same sensation that happened. It was like like when I was connected to gang stalking, your mind is kind of in like this. Your mind is like my mind was in a state of paranoia, where I would perceive things like that, you know. And that was, has it happened again? That was the last time that happened, the very last time that happened. And the thing is that even if I get completely involved with gang stalking, I know that I'm never going to be scared again of gang stalking, because I've experienced it for so long, so many times, all the faces, and I've been able to maintain complete and utter calmness when all of this was happening. Last time, I was at the gym. I already spoke to you guys about it. When the hard gang stalking happened for 2 consecutive days, I was like, whatever. Like, I've been through this. We're doing this again. Ugh. And I completely forgot about it because I was just working and working out, and I was having a blast. It was kind of cool. And I was in the middle of my gang stalking at the gym. I just began reading this book because I wanted to read it to you guys. And I was like to completely ignore the gang stalking. I thought it was freaking hysterical. Now, so so it was like a functioning of the brain that was different, that happened with no explanation, just like out of the blue. Poop, I was fine, and then all of a sudden, like all this darkness fell onto me, and then I began seeing the shadows, and then I began seeing a fucking ghost. But then I was like, whatever. I've seen this way too many times to be surprised by it, and then I just ignored it. Okay, so now we're going back to the reading. So, Parlov's findings that severe focal excitation on one area of the dog's brain could cause profound reflex inhibition of other areas seemed most applicable to these instances of human behavior. Patients would be admitted with trembling hands. I need a cigarette. With trembling hands and blank, exhausted, or bomb-happy faces. Do you know what a bomb-happy face is? I have no idea. I have absolutely no clue. If you do, please tell me what that means in the comments. Okay? Yet, they might then presently come to the doctor and demand their discharge to return to their civilian or military duties. Usually, the doctor would suppose that the patient was shooting a line and tell him to stop being foolish and go back to his ward. But it was plain to the doctor, who had studied Parlov's experiments, that such requests could be prompted by a temporary fixation on the idea of having to get out of the hospital and back to duty at all costs, and that it had caused a reflex inhibition of all thoughts about his deplorable physical and nervous state. Wow. Which would certainly prevent him from undertaking any work whatsoever. If he was then quietly told that his return onto duty must be postponed, and given the reasons for this, he might suddenly realize again how things really were and become more cooperative. The expression bomb happy was a useful coinage. Oh, there we go. It perfectly described how a bombing with its consequent fear reactions could destroy the power of integrated thinking about the past, present, or future in survivors who had caught the full brunt. Yet sedatives correctly administered on the spot, or in specialized centers and hospitals could quickly restore them to normal habits of thought, which suggested that the symptoms elsewhere ascribed to moral cowardice or simple malingering had often been produced merely by the temporary failure of normal brain function. So, moral cowardice or simple malingering. What the hell is malingering? Give me 1 second. So, what's malingering? Malignant. Exaggerate or feign illness in order to escape duty or work. Oh, malingering. That's a good word. Malingering, like cowardice or okay, that makes sense. So that's interesting. So if someone suddenly just becomes a coward, it could possibly be that because of the shock of the surprise, they could have no normal brain function. Huh. It is important to observe that such states of abnormal behavior and hitherto normal people, though rapidly dispersible under prompt and proper sedation, would also disperse after a time of their own accord. In a few weeks or months, little external evidence of such behavior remained. Fewer really incapacitating war neuroses in persons of previous mental stability appear to persist 10 years after World War II. Then after World War I. Yet, as with Pavlov's dogs, after the Leningrad flood, sensitivity to what brought about their nervous disruption is doubtless still latent in men who seem well readjusted to ordinary civilian life. Any event which reminds them of their original neurosis may affect them as strongly as the sight of water flowing under the laboratory door affected Pavlov's dogs. So what happened to Pavlov's dogs was that there was a flood, and then whenever that they were like in their cages, and they were like the lab flooded, so the dogs were in their cages with like the water up to here, and they were barely saved. So they had like a crazy ass panic. So then next thing you know is that when dogs would see water or water dropping onto the floor, they would freak out. This is happening to me. Whenever I see, when someone does like a sudden movement like that, like I get like a sudden remembrance of gang stalking. Whenever I see a headlight, not anymore, but it's happening less and less. But for a while, when I would see a headlight, I would immediately think gang stalking. And what else? Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that it's because I understand gang stalking now, it's meaningless. Like I still have, my mind still does it does what it's supposed to do. Like it's gonna make connections. However, I don't take them personal. I don't get sad whenever I have those memories, because I have transmutated all those negative emotions, all those negative experiences into this channel. I'm making the most positive thing I can possibly make out of that experience, which is helping people. So I know it wasn't in vain. I suffered a lot, but it's okay, because I'm working on something that it was worth all that suffering. If I can help one person, it's gonna be all worth it. I have already helped people, so this is absolutely worth it. Now, further evidence of the applicability of Pavlov's canine findings to problems of human psychology was found in the detailed response of our patients to treatment. Pavlov found heavy sedation extremely valuable in helping dogs which had broken down under imposed stresses. He obtained entirely different responses to treatment from dogs classified according to the 4 basic temperaments and widely varying doses of sedatives were needed for the strong. And widely varying doses of sedatives were needed for the strong excitatory and the weak inhibitory dog of the same body weight. We found, so listen to these. Now we're gonna talk about how the character of the dog had an impact. It was a big variable on how much sedatives have to be given to the dog. So, these are and widely varying doses of sedatives were needed for the strong excitatory and the weak inhibitory dog of the same body weight. We found the same thing in patients given emergency frontline sedation when they broke down under severe bombing stresses. They could be classified in the same groups, and the amount of sedative needed would vary considerably. The value of heavy emergency frontline sedation in preventing acute neurosis from becoming chronic had been repeatedly observed quite early in the war. But the need for differential dosage was not yet generally appreciated, and in most centers, fairly standardized doses were prescribed for all types of persons breaking down under battle or blitz stresses. But as soon as Parlow's findings became available and were reconsidered at this point, we decided that the nervous system of man responded to extreme stresses in as much the same way as that of dogs. Under severe and prolonged stresses, people of a strong excitatory or weak inhibitory temperament would, as already described, reach states of uncontrolled excitement or paralyzed inhibition. The other two temperamental types, namely the lively or controlled excitatory, able to fight back, giving as much punishment as he took, and the phlegmatic type, seemingly unmoved by most ordinary stresses, also occurred in men as well as in dogs. The predominance of inhibitory symptoms when the victim finally breaks down, an important matter when we come to consider political conversion, and bring, the predominance of inhibitory symptoms when the victim finally breaks down, open parentheses, an important matter when we come to consider political conversion and brainwashing, close parentheses, was shown by a 1942 finding that report that around the time of Dunkirk and the London Blitz, no less than 144 out of 1,000. Does that number sound familiar, 144? The 144 angels that were sent? It's 144, right? I don't know, that number sounds familiar. If you know what number that is, or if you have more context about that number, I cannot remember right now out of the top of my head, put it in the comments. No less than 144 of 1,000 consecutive admissions to a neurosis center for civilian and military patients near London had suffered from temporary losses of memory. Such loss of memory is often a simple inhibitory response of the brain to overwhelming stresses it cannot deal with by any other means. And a peacetime psychiatrist rarely meets more than 1 or 2 cases of this particular hysterical complaint in the course of a year. The need for varying of sedation dosages in humans according to whether they were very strong excitatory or weak inhibitory became very clear in the following kinds of circumstance. Most soldiers who broke down on the Normandy beachheads were at first given immediate frontline sedation, and only those who did not respond to this treatment were returned to neurosis centers in England. By then, 3 to 7 days of sleep had already been induced by heavy doses of sedation. The patients sent back for treatment in our hospitals were found to have an abnormally high percentage of psychotics or neurotics in their family histories. Many had themselves suffered from pre-war nervous breakdowns and consulted other psychiatrists. Their symptoms usually suggested the weak inhibitory type of Parlow's classification. But when the casualty clearing stations on the beachheads temporarily overflowed, patients were sent to us before a reasonable period of heavy sedation could be allowed them. Period of heavy sedation could be allowed them. I'm not sure, that makes no sense. But when the casualty clearing stations on the beachheads temporarily overflowed, patients were sent to us before a reasonable period of heavy sedation could be allowed them. These showed far more acute and severe excitatory reactions than the former batch, but many of them responded well to the large doses of sedatives prescribed and could soon return to at least modified duties. Yet, the same doses administered to the weak inhibitory patients had, as in Pavlov's dogs, served only to aggravate the inhibition, so that many arrived with paralysis or inhibitory stammers, or even in deep hysterical stupors. Experience shows that inhibitory responses in men of this temperament can, in fact, be helped by sedation, but only with much smaller doses than those benefiting the strong excitatory types. Pavlov had explained this phenomenon as follows. Open quote. The best therapy against neurosis, in agreement with the findings of this clinic, are bromides or bromides. I'm not sure, but it's like some medicine to make people relax or something. But the dose should be regulated accurately for the strong type 5 to 8 times greater than for the weak type. And again, formerly, we come to an erroneous conclusion here, not regulating the dose of bromide correspondingly to the type. We thought that this administration in weak animals was never helpful, and that in large doses it was injurious. A most important part of the therapy is the exact dosing corresponding to the precise type of nervous system. The tendency of end quote. The tendency of physical debilitation to hasten a breakdown under imposed stresses had been noted by Pavlov in his dogs. And the same phenomenon was observed again and again in our patients. Those with previously stable temperaments could often be distinguished from the unstable types by noting whether or not they had lost weight before first reporting sick. Okay? During the Blitz, civilians would often start complaining of neurotic symptoms and be unable to understand why they had developed such severe anxieties about bombing when they had hitherto remained unaffected by it for weeks or months. In such cases, it was frequently found that they had lost from 15 to 30 pounds in weight before this ever-increasing sensitivity to bombing stimuli became noticeable. But once these abnormal reactions set in after a severe loss of weight, they could not necessarily be dispersed by fanning the patient up again. Though this was done in for general interests of his health and were likely as not to remain fixed. So when people lost weight, they became more sensitive. I'm thinking, is there an overweight targeted individual? Huh. And what if gang stalking could be used like a tool to lose weight? Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Okay, let's continue. The most stable types might collapse only after a loss of 30 pounds in weight, caused by a lack of nourishing food, lack of sleep, and similar debilitating factors characteristic of wartime. But patients who reported similar symptoms without any loss of weight had therefore put up less fight, were likely to be chronically neurotic types, unlikely to respond to any routine treatment. So if you don't lose weight, the most stable types be clubs. But patients who reported similar symptoms without any loss of weight have therefore put up less fight. Okay, very many of the more spectacular reactions to war stresses could be labeled as anxiety hysteria. Indeed, one of the commonest final reactions to stress in patients of previously stable temperament, as opposed to the unstable, was the development of hysterical responses. Pavlov gave the same label to similar responses in his dogs, at the point of breakdown under imposed stresses, and constantly diagnosed hypnoidal or hypnotic states in them. The frequency of hysterical reactions to severe imposed stresses in both humans and animals is of the greatest significance here. Descriptions of hysteria in all psychiatric textbooks record bizarre symptoms which do not become always understandable except by analogy with Pavlov's mechanistic experiments to dogs. The mental aberration characteristic of hysteria is often similar to a form of protective inhibition, and so is hysterical paralysis, even in peacetime hysteria. What's aberration? Give me 1 second. Aberration. A departure from what is normal, usual, or expected, typically one that is unwelcome. They describe an outbreak of violence in the area as an aberration. Characteristic that deviates from the normal type. Okay. All right. Even in peacetime hysteria, something approaching the bomb-happy phase of acute war neurosis can be discerned. Once a state of hysteria has been induced in men or dogs by mounting stresses which the brain can no longer tolerate, protective inhibition is likely to supervene. This will disturb the individual's ordinary conditioned behavior patterns. In human beings, states of greatly increased suggestibility are also found. And so are their opposite, namely, states in which the patient is deaf to all suggestions, however sensible. Hysteria has produced sudden and unexplained panics in most wars, often among troops famous for their battle record. Among the finest fighters of the ancient world were Caesar's veteran legionaries, and from the bravest of these he chose his eagle bearers. Yet, after 10 to 13 years of continuous campaigning in Gaul, they also could break down suddenly. Suetonius records 2 cases of hysterical eagle bearers running away on different occasions. When Caesar tried to stop them, the first attempted to strike him with the sharp butt of the eagle. The second left the eagle in his hand and rushed on. But these are extreme cases. Hysteria was also evidenced in the susceptibility to rumors of Londoners during the Blitz. Brain exhaustion led them to believe stories about Lord Haha broadcasts from Germany, which they would have at once rejected as untrue when in a more relaxed and less exhausted state. So pay attention to this. When they were tired, when they had brain exhaustion, they were more susceptible to things that they know were not true. That they seemed more true when they were less exhausted and more relaxed. Do you see something with gang stalking? Maybe? My gang stalking it's almost invisible. I still see it, but it's a lot less. It's a lot less impactful, significantly less impactful. Why? Because I am sober, I am well rested, I am well fed and relaxed. That's why. That is pretty much one of the best things you can do if you're getting gang stalked. Eat, sleep, rest. That probably makes me sound like a broken record. However, I cannot emphasize that enough. Now, the anxiety endangered by the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, and the Blitz created a state in which large groups of persons were temporarily able to accept new and sometimes strange beliefs without criticism. I'm going to read that again for you. The anxiety engendered. The anxiety engendered by the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, and the Blitz created a state in which large groups of persons were temporarily able to accept new and sometimes strange beliefs without criticism. The mechanism of increasing states of suggestibility will be discussed repeatedly in later chapters, since this is one of the means of indoctrinating ordinary people, both religiously and politically, and socially, I will say. Critical faculties may become inhibited during these states of anxiety and hysteria. This is really important, guys, stuff. This is really important stuff, guys. Open quote. He whom the gods wish to destroy, comma, they first of all drive mad. End quote. Wow. I kind of don't like that quote because I feel like it's calling gang stalkers gods. Anyways. So, thus, some soldiers and civilians in acute states of breakdown cannot be reassured by any remark, however sensible. Others accept reassurances, however foolishly phrased. Police forces in many parts of the world rely on this inhibition of critical faculties and normal judgment to obtain full confessions from prisoners subjected to debilitation or emotional stresses without the need to injure them physically. This is going to be in chapter 9. The same phenomenon can also be turned to curative use by psychiatrists, as will be shown in due course. It enables them to suggest new attitudes to life and new patterns of behavior in the hope that they will replace harmful ones. Parlow has drawn attention in his lectures to many other similarities between canine and human neurosis. Why varieties of neurotic behavior in time of war have been stressed here is because they have been so accurately reported by so many psychological field workers, and because they occurred among ordinary types of persons rather than among the predominantly neurotic and psychotic personality types who are admitted to psychiatric hospitals. in peacetime. Parlov was also presumably dealing with ordinary dogs. In both cases, the brain was being subjected to unavoidable stresses. The dog isolated on his experimental stand, the soldier in his trench or lonely foxhole, and the civilian in a fire brigade or rescue squad. All had to take whatever came to them, and their ordeals were similar. In peacetime society, an opportunity for escape is generally given to those who find themselves in situations that make too great demands on the nervous system. Hence, the rarity among average people of strikingly abnormal behavior under stress. And the civilian population, even in modern warfare, usually comes off better than the soldier. During the Blitz, for instance, Londoners who had begun to develop anxiety symptoms during bombing could often arrange to be evacuated or obtain a period of rest. But for the soldier, it was generally a case of they must conquer or die, who have no retreat. In inducing experimental neurosis in his dogs, Parlov found it necessary, as a rule, to secure their cooperation. In human beings, neuroses are also commonest among those who try to overcome the stresses to which they are exposed. Like a dog on the experimental stand who refuses to cooperate in the experiment, soldiers who run away before the first shot is fired may keep their nervous system intact and thus avoid severe breakdown until they are caught up by difficulties which they have hitherto escaped. There is something to be said for the Chinese Taoist philosophy, which enjoins the avoidance of stress, as opposed to the philosophers of aggressive daring that still persist in Europe and North America. So, this is me giving you a different approach to gang stalking. My initial approach to gang stalking was feed into it, try to fucking punch it in the face. But now that my nervous system is all fucked up, I'm trying the other one, which is completely ignore, dodge the bullets. Literally, like in the Matrix, you need to dodge the bullets. Or just ignore them because you can. How do you ignore gang stalking? Cut off all the access that gang stalkers have to you. Don't engage with people who are pushing gang stalking. If you're getting gang stalked, you're gonna know who's the gang. You're gonna know who's trying to get close to you, and who's gang stalking you. They're gonna give you those signals. Trust your instinct. And as soon as you see it, boom, block, ignore, delete. Tell them, don't speak to me. I have no interest in talking to you. You're not the type of person that I would like to associate with. Sorry, not sorry. Bye. Like that. So that is the new approach I'm taking. Now, if you want, so I'm gonna tell you two things. Living gang stalking was freaking awesome to me. It was awful in the moment, but it gave me some crazy experiences because even though I was here in reality with you, what I was living was completely different. You can see that by the stories that I have told on my channel. However, if you want to avoid the game, just don't pay any attention to gang stalkers and just stay away from anyone who displays any type of gang stalking behavior. And it's that simple. Your nervous system will stay intact. I promise you that. And if they're doing the hard gang stalking where they're doing the thing that makes you paranoid, just sit down, look at some memes, read a book, watch YouTube videos until they're done. Completely ignore them. Don't Tell him, I know what you're gonna do. I know what you're up to. You're not gonna get away with it. Blah blah. Sit down, relax, ignore them until they get tired, because they're gonna get tired, and then just like leave. That's it. But don't display any stress. And again, continue with the day as if that never happened. It's that simple. Okay. So now, where are we? Oh, okay. Okay, so Pavlov's findings also illuminate many varieties of normal behavior noted in common forms of nervous and mental sickness. William Gordon published a very interesting paper on this subject in 1948. He pointed out that the mature brain builds up systems of positive and negative conditioning responses, by which the individual adapts himself to his environment, mostly basing his present behavior on past experience, and that mental health is determined by the efficiency of such adaptation. In so severe mental disorder as schizophrenia, a partial or complete reversal of most previous conditioning is observed. Gordon, like Pavlov, believes that schizophrenia results from the ultra-paradoxical phase of brain activity. He points out that schizophrenics are often described as having lost all interest in their former pleasures and pursuits, and then suddenly develop depraved, suicidal, or antisocial behavior. This change can sometimes be explained by showing that the patient now responds positively to his former negative conditioning, and negatively to his former positive conditioning. How devastating a sudden reversal of one's positive and negative conditioning can be is described by Gordon in a series of apt illustrations. The human being develops eating habits in which a number of stimuli involving smell, vision, hearing, and taste all acquire strong positive conditioning, while others acquire equally strong negative responses. Some smells, for instance, may make a human mouth salivate, as with Pavlov's dogs in anticipation of food. Others cause nausea and a temporary loss of appetite, but mentally sick patients will suddenly start eating foods which they previously had a repugnance, and refusing other foods which they used to enjoy. Children are trained to urinate and defecate at definite times and inappropriate places. As Gordon points out, the sight or touch of the chamber pot becomes a strongly positive conditioned response in the young child, whereas clothes, bedding, floors, and furniture become negatively charged. But when the patient falls mentally sick, it is often observed that clothes, bedding, floors become positive for urination and defecation, and that it is almost impossible to make him use the lavatory pan, commode, or bedpan provided, because these will now all elicit negative responses. Gordon also emphasizes the apparent purposefulness and deliberateness of the new activities. Numerous other instances occur in very varied fields of human behavior. Faulty conditioning in childhood, or a sudden reversal of conditioning brought about by nervous mental sickness later in life, can cause havoc to the sexual function, which may become shamelessly erotic in the previously inhibited or totally inhibited in those of normal tendencies. Obsessional thinking becomes particularly distressing when the paradoxical, ultra-paradoxical phases of brain activity supervene. Okay, that's interesting. I wonder if I experienced any of, or was close to feeling any of these things. Because when you're getting gang stalked, you literally are, your mind is obsessively thinking about gang stalking. everything has to do with gang stalking. Everything. It's insane. The most conscientious of mothers can suddenly be obsessed with a fear that she may do harm to the child, whom she loves more than all the world. People most afraid of dying can become obsessed with the idea that they may throw themselves from a window or the live rail of an electric railway. They realize the abnormality of these thoughts, but the more they struggle against them, the stronger they tend to grow. Christian church has always been greatly exercised with the problem of how to exercise evil thoughts which persist against one's will. One way sometimes recommended is not to bother about having evil thoughts. There is another, which is to use prolonged prayer and fasting until a point of temporary debilitation is reached, when a priest or holy man may be able to alter the behavior patterns in the penitent's mind. It's like an indoctrination. So when the person is having evil thoughts, they're praying and fasting, so they get a temporary debilitation. And guess what? The priest is telling them love of God and blah blah. And guess what? It's a tiny indoctrination that they do on people. We're almost done. So the extremity in which I find myself. Okay, oh sorry. So in a letter written to a brother Jesuit in May 1635, Father Surin, an exorcist of the nuns of Lundun, describes in a religious setting what seems to be the most distressing paradoxical and ultra-paradoxical brain disturbances brought on by the strain and anxiety of his psychotherapeutic exertions. Okay, so listen. So this is a quote in the letter of the Father Surin, of the exorcist. The extremity in which I find myself is such that I have scarcely one free faculty. When I wish to speak, my mouth is closed. At Mass, I am suddenly stopped. At table, I cannot convey the morsel to my lips. At confession, I forget in a moment all my sins, and I feel that the devil comes and goes as in his own house within me. Directly I awake, he is with me at prayer. He deprives me of my consciousness when he pleases. When my heart would expand itself in God, he fills it with rage. When I would watch, he sets me asleep and boasts that he is my master. End quote. It is not the purpose of this book to document all of the possible occurrences of human beings of equivalent, paradoxical, and ultra-paradoxical faces with particular case stories. This chapter has, however, suggested that, though men are not dogs, it would be foolish indeed to continue to disregard entirely experimentation on the higher nervous activity of dogs as irrelevant to human psychology, or to the question of how a man's thoughts and beliefs can be effectively changed. Boom! So, this was chapter 2 of War for the Mind, the mechanics of indoctrination and brainwashing. I hope you enjoyed this reading. I hope you learned something. It's been a pleasure to read it for you. And I hope this has been just as joyous as it has been for me to read this to you, as I hope it has been for you to listen to me reading it to you. Now, Our next chapter is chapter 3, the use of drugs in psychotherapy. You have no idea how much I want to just like jump chapters and just like get to the chapters where there is more direct correlation with gang stalking. So look, we're gonna look. So here we have so many. So these are the chapters that follow. So right now we're on chapter 3. Well, we're about to start chapter 3, the use of drugs in psychotherapy. So this is what we have coming up next. All right. So psychoanalysis, shock treatments, and lobotomy. Techniques for religious conversion. Applications of religious techniques. Brainwashing in religion and politics. Brainwashing in ancient times. The eliciting of confessions. Chapter 10, consolidation and prevention. General conclusions. So the chapter 10 is consolidation and prevention. That is the chapter that told me the best way to stop getting brainwashed, and to prevent indoctrination is to not give a fuck. To have no emotional ties to the person or to whatever is being indoctrinated into you. You have to keep your emotions to yourself. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.